Nike has called this sneaker many things. They seem to be pretty confident about this one. They say that this air unit is the most revolutionary. They say that this sneaker is the pinnacle of comfort. Well, it's Nike, so of course they would say that. So today I'm here to tell you what this sneaker is really all about. We're gonna break it down and of course give you my general thoughts on today's pair of sneakers, which of course is the brand new Nike Air Max 2021. So we've got a Nike box, a little bit different to what you would normally find on a Nike box. It says Move to Zero is Nike's journey towards zero carbon and zero waste to help protect the future of sport. We've been through this, we've spoken about this box before, and of course the pair of shoes inside does consist of some form of recycled content, but of course we'll get into that in a minute. But first let me flip the top off of these and show you today's pair of sneakers, and that is the brand new Nike Air Max 2021. Ever since Nike released the Air Max 1 with the first visible air unit, Nike has definitely made the air unit a priority in their marketing and of course their sneakers. And it seems like over time Nike has been pursuing making this air unit more and more visible. But the bigger and more bulbous air units seem to be something that Nike is really using as a selling point, especially with their most recent sneakers. The 2017 Vapor Max, the 2018 Air Max 270, and the 2019 Air Max 720. It almost seems like through the years the air unit has gotten bigger and more obvious and more bulbous, and it seems to be something that Nike is really leaning towards. Now this 2021 Air Max clearly isn't the biggest, however it certainly is a very clear selling point for this pair of shoes. I mean, they carved out some of the midsole just to expose this huge air unit. Now in the past I've found specifically the Air Max 720 and the Air Max 270 to be somewhat uncomfortable pairs of shoes. I mean, not necessarily uncomfortable in the traditional sense where it's hurting your feet, but there definitely is a learning curve when it comes to walking in those pairs of shoes. The air unit that is underfoot feels kind of rigid and you almost feel like you're on a platform that slopes down. So how does this 2021 version stack up? Well, let me give you some specifics on this pair of shoes before we get into all of that. These actually released on July the 22nd. They retail for £145 here in the UK or $160 if you're out in the US. Nike's other selling point for the Air Max 2021 is going to be the sustainable materials that have been placed on this pair of shoes. As you can see, it comes with a little tag just basically saying that this shoe is made with at least 20% of recycled content. As far as I'm aware, they don't specifically tell you what parts are made of recycled content. However, you can kind of see the first place is the outsole where there's that speckling going on that we saw with the Space Hippie sneakers. Again, something where they grind down other sneakers that are unused or other midsoles, and then they place it into the mold and use it towards this pair of shoes. So let's start with the upper. Now there are some things that I do really like about the upper of this pair of shoes. However, it does feel pretty synthetic. Pretty much all of the materials that you find on here definitely feel a little bit plasticky and maybe a little bit more on the cheap side. The base material, or the majority of what this shoe is made out of, comes in, I guess, a mix of a fabric mesh and of course this kind of plasticky mesh, which seems to be the film that's overcoating this pair of shoes. Now you also have these very interesting texturized rubber pieces, which I guess are there for a design standpoint, but also there for some reinforcement. I do have to say that this upper does feel pretty durable, even though it does feel relatively cheap. It does seem like something that would stand up to the conditions and long-term usage. Over on the tongue and the medial side of the shoe, you have a very wide looking mesh material, almost seems like a net. However, there is fabric under there, so although you will get a decent amount of breathability with this pair of shoes, it's not necessarily as breathable as it may appear. So overall, I'm not too mad at the upper, and honestly the design of it looks pretty cool. Specifically this lacing area, it does look quite trail shoe like, if that makes sense, but I do actually like the way that it looks. You've got a pull tab, or a huge piece of ribbon that goes from the bottom of the laces all the way to the top, and of course you get rope style reflective lacing, which again gives it a bit more of a rugged appearance. The sock liner is decent. It is relatively padded. Again, I don't really have any gripes when it comes to the comfortability of the upper. However, of course, I do have to bring your attention to the midsole, which is a little bit of a different story. Now, the way that they've made this midsole look, it kind of seems to be something revolutionary. However, when you break it down, it's almost just a little bit of a different take on an Air Max 270. This very large bulbous air unit that you find at the heel of the shoe, again, is very reminiscent of the Air Max 270. However, on the outside, you do have, I guess, carved out midsole is what they're calling it. However, it just looks like some really flimsy rubber elements that go across on the outside. Of course, you've got some Air Max branding and some Nike branding as well. Now, the foam cushioning that you find on the forefoot of the shoe is actually pretty nice. I'm not too sure whether it's React. However, it does feel pretty good when you're walking around in it. And again, in hand, you can get a decent amount of squish to that forefoot cushioning. However, mixing that cushioning with this Air Max unit, again, has the exact same feeling when you're walking in a 270 or a 720, where you're kind of feeling that wedge, like you're higher up off of the heel and you're kind of almost sloping down. And of course, when you go heel to toe and you're walking around, it does leave you feeling a little bit odd, and I guess there is going to be a learning curve to wearing this shoe as well. Now, even though it may seem like I'm saying a lot of negative things about this pair of shoes, I overall think that it's a pretty decent pair of shoes. I wouldn't buy it necessarily for the premium materials, or not even necessarily for the pinnacle of comfort like Nike says. It's a very average feeling pair of shoes on foot. Definitely, I wouldn't call it the pinnacle. It feels relatively good, and if you like the way that the 720 felt on foot, or of course the 270, I definitely think that you're probably going to like this pair as well. Now, of course, as for sizing on this pair of shoes, I went true to size, and I would say it fits pretty perfect. But that is pretty much it. That is my thoughts on this new Air Max 2021. I'm always interested in the latest and greatest from Nike. They do seem to come up with some really interesting designs just like this one. But again, let me know what you think of the Air Max 2021 down in the comment section. What do you think of this redesigned midsole air unit? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section. But like always, thank you so much for coming through, hanging out for yet again another video. Thank you for liking, commenting, and of course subscribing. I'll catch you guys in the next one. But until then,